Hello, I'm Fred Quinn. This presentation shares my journey of faith through the lens of Latino liberation theology. It is the story of how God's love and justice became real to me through family, work, and ministry. My journey moves from culture to conversion to compassion. My grandparents came from Sonora and Jalisco in the 1930s. Following the crop season across Arizona and California, they carried faith like luggage, never leaving it behind. In the fields and small homes, prayer and work were one. Ada María Isasi-Díaz reminds us that la comunidad, the community, is where Hispanic people find identity and meaning. In that spirit, I am learning that faith is a part of real life, not something you just believe in. Growing up, I moved between Catholic and Protestant churches, but faith always felt like family. Gutiérrez reminds us that for Hispanics, communities, the church is familia. It's not just a structure, but a living body of relationships. My faith grew in kitchens, at the baptisms, and in shared meals more than any classroom. It was there I learned that belonging to the church means belonging to one another, a family. At home, we spoke English, but my grandparents spoke Spanish. I could understand them, and I replied in English. I felt caught between two worlds, American and Mexican, yet not fully in either. Vincent Olia tells of his father being ridiculed and punished for speaking Spanish in class. My dad shared that same story with me. It reminded me that God was there, even in our struggle to belong. What felt like loss to me was shaping up who I was becoming. Moving from a poor neighborhood school to a wealthy Catholic school exposed me to privilege and pressure. To fit in, I began hiding who I was. I stopped identifying as Mexican and tried to blend in, just like Jesus, the Galilean Jew, who was rejected in Jerusalem. I felt unseen. Virgilio Elizondo teaches that God turns rejection into belonging. Gustavo Gutiérrez reminds us that true freedom starts when we recover our God-given dignity. Looking back, I realized that hiding my identity meant hiding the image of God within me. There came a time when I stopped seeing my story as something to hide and to begin to see it as a gift. Virgilio Elizondo says that Mexican-American mestizo life can take on new meaning when shame becomes honor, resentment becomes gratitude, and excluded becomes mission. That truth awakens something in me. God was never asking me to fit in, but to live fully as He created me. My story, my culture, and my faith were never separated. They were always one sacred journey. At IBM, I started in the lowest position and worked my way up through discipline and persistence. Every promotion felt like grace, not luck. I learned that honest work can be a prayer when it serves others. Gustavo Gutiérrez reminds us that faith and justice walk together. In each decision and each act of fairness, I began to see work as a way to participate in God's creation. Success meant nothing without compassion and the greater good of all. Leading at Avnet taught me that leadership means service. Managing billions of dollars only really matters if people felt valued. The gospel calls this praxis, faith expressed in action. Gustavo Gutiérrez writes that communion with the Lord means living a Christian life centered on a creative commitment to serve others. To lead like Jesus is to build community, not empires. One day, a coworker asked how well I knew the Bible. I realized I had never truly read it, But once I began, I couldn't stop. Scripture became a conversation. Ada María Isasi-Díaz writes that theology is a communal process, and liberation is a personal journey that happens within and through community. The Bible spoke through my life, revealing God's presence in ordinary moments. That encounter became my deeper conversion. While earning my MBA, I dreamed of creating a company called Bull Brown. It would focus on God, people, and the planet. That dream linked faith and business, echoing St. Francis' call to care for creation and one another. At the time, I didn't know much about St. Francis, yet I was already singing his song and being drawn towards his spirit. God was working in mysterious ways, preparing my heart for what would come next. Serving in mission in Monterrey, Mexico, I helped feed families living in poverty. Each Christmas, the line grew longer, from 50 to 500 children. Gustavo Gutiérrez reminds us that to be poor is to suffer hunger, exploitation, and the loss of dignity. Love of God is expressed in the struggle for liberation from those realities. In every hungry face, I met the Christ child of Bethlehem. Trekking through the Himalayas, I met nomads who had little but shared everything. Their hospitality revealed God's universality. Roberto Goizueta writes that the mestizo, impure culture of the borderland, is the privileged place of God's self-revelation. I saw that truth in their way of life. Though they worshiped differently, the Creator was reflected in their joy, generosity, and reverence for creation and all humanity. In their borderland, I felt the presence of God who transcends every boundary. Serving in Ukraine showed me faith under fire. Amid war and devastation, I met people who prayed not for victory, but for peace. Their faith was quite yet unshakable. I realized that God is not distant from suffering, but fully present within it. Like St. Francis, who crossed battle lines to meet the Sultan, I learned that peace begins with presence. Accompaniment is the heart of the gospel, walking beside others even when words fall short. Serving in the hospital taught me that faith often appears where pain and hope meet. Walking from room to room, I witnessed courage that spoke louder than words. One patient, a young Latina losing her limbs to diabetes, thanked me after receiving communion. She said, "I feel better now." Her gratitude revealed a strength that theology often overlooks. Ada María Isasi-Díaz writes that religion is central in the struggle for survival and liberation. In her faith, I saw the heart of mujerista theology, a faith that endures, hopes, and transforms suffering into grace. In every encounter, I learned that compassion is the language of God, and presence itself becomes prayer. To serve better, I began relearning Spanish. It felt like reclaiming a lost gift. Every new prayer spoken in Spanish connects me to my ancestors and reminds me that faith has a language of its own. Roberto Goizueta writes that God takes on flesh among mestizo and marginalized peoples. In that truth, I discovered that the incarnation is not just a moment in history, but something that happens whenever we speak God's love in the language of our hearts. My family reflects many cultures, Irish, Italian, and Mexican, all blended into one household. Through them, I see how God works across generations. Eduardo Fernández writes about watching two very different cultures come together in a majestic dance. That image reminds me of my own family where faith and culture move together, revealing God's rhythm in our shared story. When I explored my ancestry, I discovered a blend of cultures that told a larger story, one of unity and diversity. Each line of heritage felt like a different melody in the same song of faith. Timothy Motavina reminds us that the mutual influence of Catholicism and Hispanic people in the United States is shaping not just the future of American Catholic life, but also the life of the nation. My DNA results become more than science. They become a reminder that the Church, like my family, finds strength in diversity. Today, I understand liberation theology as a call to accompaniment, a faith that walks beside others in their struggles. Gustavo Gutiérrez writes that the theology of liberation seeks to reflect on the experience and meaning of faith through a commitment to abolish injustice and build a new society. In the hospital, in missions, and in family life, God teaches me that justice begins with presence. Faith becomes real when it's shared. My journey shows that God's love and justice are lived through culture, suffering, and service. From Sonora to San Jose, from IBM to ministry, Christ has walked beside me. This is my liberation story and our shared invitation to build a church of hope, compassion, and unity. Thank you for watching.